You know, if they had been smart, they could have handled this a different way. You know what? But they weren't. That's the thing. They all acted like ignoramuses. And like it was their very first rodeo. I mean, I can think of 1,000 ways they could have got out of this instead of, you know, off in 2 boys. But, you know, whatever. I guess when you've got the medical examiner paid off, you can do whatever you want, right? So anyway, in the middle of this, there is the head of the drug task force in Saline County was Jean Duffy. Now, on her very first day in office, she was told, do not ever investigate public officials. And she thought, that is wild. Like, okay, I wasn't even thinking about that. Well, as she's doing her job, she, of course, has informants on the inside, you know, people who are active purchasers and abusers of substances. And she started seeing a big connection here. So when she would suggest it to law enforcement, like, I think that these deaths may cross over into my territory, into the drug task force. And at first she was given a gentle pushback. You know, basically, you know, no, we've already checked that out, whatever. But then it got to be a little bit more forceful, not terrible. So, but she understood what they were saying. So she started secretly doing this on her own. And she didn't tell anybody. She was just using the informants. And she was saying the huge link to law enforcement, the attorneys, the drug drops, the whole 9 yards. She was saying all of this from people who were purchasing and trafficking in the area. So eventually she found a witness, another witness who was still alive. Imagine that. Her name was Charlene Wilson. Big background on her. Yes, she was an informant. Yes, she was a drug abuser. But she was also a, you know, sorta-ish girlfriend of Dan Harmon. And she says she was there on the tracks. And even though some of her testimony, you know, some things, the details are a little different from time to time on some things. I mean, she was in there, you know, the white powdery stuff. So, I mean, you know, I don't know how good her memory was. But what she did do is she did corroborate everything that the other witnesses said about the men who were on the tracks, including the 2 boys that were, you know, unalived. When Dan Harmon got wind of Jean Duffy, you know, scratching around in his business, he started this smear campaign in the newspapers and telling people whatever. I mean, she was accused of everything, called incompetent. Finally, he ends up running her out of Arkansas. However, she would come back later. So before she left, though, she had all of this stuff. She had all of these files, all of this information and this proof. She turns it over to the FBI, to a guy named Chuck Banks. Good old Chuck. So you know what good old Chuck does? As soon as Jean gives him the information and she's gone from Arkansas, you know, he's like, done. Nothing to see here, boys. Yeah, he's not the only one in the FBI that, I mean, there's a Birdsong. Look, there's a whole lot of people with a whole lot of dirt on their hands. But, you know, this is where I'm ending this part. Because 1993, Linda Ives, okay, you know, the grand jury was shut down. The case was closed. They're not doing anything. They're not investigating this homicide anymore. And she finally got the case reopened again in 1993. And she was assisted by Detective John Brown. And he was great at first. And then, you know, if you look in his career, again, these are things that in some of these hours-long videos that Carnage on Ice has of his testimony and stuff, he did change his mind about a few things, and he kind of flipped sides a little bit later on, probably from the pressure, as did most of these people, I imagine. But he also found her witness, Charlene Wilson. And so when he found that witness, he goes back and he asks law enforcement to see the case files and the evidence and stuff like that. And that's when he finds out most of it was destroyed or missing. Yeah, it's just missing. I don't know what happened to it. Or, oh, yeah, the case was closed. We destroyed it because that's what you do. Jeez, I can't even. Charlene also, remember, she had said that this whole thing was led by Dan Harmon, as everybody else did. Later on, they found another living witness. Ta-da! Actually, this is great. It was Tom Newhouse. He was out there with some other kids looking for weed. He was only 12 at the time, so he never came forward, but that was in 87. Now it's 93, and he was older. He said he recognized Dan Harmon for sure. It wasn't like, you can get out of it because of the moonlight, whatever, it's dark. He said he recognized the voice, and he recognized Dan Harmon because his mother was dating him. Now, Dan Harmon was married, with girlfriends. It's a long history of that kind of stuff. But he, being 12 years old, really didn't know all that. But that's the only reason he knew who this attorney was. And he's like, what is Dan doing out here? And then he hears the gunshot, and then all this stuff happens. Okay, so he was also a very credible witness. However, whatever. It's still going on. And this is also the story from two passerbys who, okay, we've taken care of just about all of the witnesses on the tracks, but there was still a problem because there were two more people that saw this. One was driving by. Well, actually, both were driving by, and they basically said the same thing, as well as some of the other witnesses. They said at the confrontation with Dan Harmon and his posse, then they turned around and the boys, he heard a shot. He did not know which boys shot at them, but they, either Don or Kevin shot, and then they ran. So they ran over to a grocery store. Now, this is, dark 30 in the morning. And in the meantime of all this stuff happening at the grocery store, two cars come by, and they notice, first of all, it's early in the morning, nobody should be out. And secondly, they both said the same thing. They see these two officers beating the stew out of these two juveniles. And there's two officers, they're just hammering down on them. And you can't help but notice that. Then they both said they stuffed the boys in the seat of the car and they drove off. Now, these are the same two boys that would be found on the tracks the next morning. So now you've got them in the woods. You've got actual officers. And they said the officers. Now, something else, let me tell you that this was close to the city or the town of Alexander. This whole area had a population of about 5,000. What does that sound like? Delphi has 3,000. This one had 5,000. Still, not very many people in this area. So, of course, you probably do recognize the police officers and things like that if you're an adult, as these two men were. They said the officers were Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell. Okay, but identified clearly and by some of the witnesses, deceased now, but who also said these were two of the guys that were with Dan Harmon. So now we know that we've got Dan Harmon, Keith McCaskill, deceased, and Jay and Kirk, the two officers, and then there is a fifth one, and it's kind of sketchy who that one was. But pretty much the rest of them are accounted for. If you remember the story American Made, it was a movie. It's about Barry Seal. He was the guy that was, dropping the drugs from airplanes everywhere in the Midwest, all over the place, but especially in the Midwest. So that is kind of the connection that we're looking at. When they brought this up to anybody who would listen, the FBI, whatever, it gets shut down. But as we know from Charlene Wilson's testimony, not only puts Roger Clinton in this circle of traffickers, but also his brother Billy, otherwise known as William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, then Governor of Arkansas, aka Slick Willie. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I can tell you that there are a lot of people that definitely place both of the Clintons in this trafficking ring, okay? But if that's true, they would have been caught and prosecuted, right? Like, that's the way we do things here. Oh, in the middle of this, Unsolved Mysteries, listen to this. Unsolved Mysteries does a story on the boys on the tracks, and I don't even know if it's in existence anymore. It might be, but they've had to edit it a couple of times, because the first time it ran, it said, we're looking for, someone who can witness this and, can give us information on the deaths of these two boys. And you need to contact Officer Garrett and let him know what's going on. So, of course, they get calls in, right? Because it's Unsolved Mysteries, and people are like, oh, okay, I know something about that. They go to Garrett. Oh, my goodness. The people that went to Garrett ended up not here. Yeah. So while everybody is saying, this prosecutor, Dan Harmon, he's just trying to help, yada, 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 yada. The police are doing everything they can, the FBI, everybody's involved, we really care. Yeah. Well, in 1996, the beloved and well-esteemed Dan Harmon gets arrested. Imagine that. Dan gets arrested. Y'all, take you a drink of tea. Dan gets arrested for smuggling drugs into the U.S. via corrupt officials. That is the charge. It ain't just him. It's a ring of corruption. Wow, Dan, I can't believe you had anything to do with that and the possible offing of two juveniles, but of course he said he wasn't guilty. Yeah, song and dance. Well, he gets out after years. In 2010, guess what happens? He's arrested for drugs again. Yeah, Dan, come on. You gotta get better at your job. Meanwhile, the case of the boys on the track is still not solved. I mean, come on. Witnesses say you're there. You've been busted twice. I mean, if that ain't more evidence than they've got against Richard Allen, I don't know what there is. But let's go on. By the way, speaking of Richard Garrett, the officer, Keith McCaskill had gone to him, if I didn't say that. And, he knew Garrett. So I guess he talked with Garrett. And, yeah. So that is why Unsolved Mysteries has had to change all of their stuff. Garrett wanted to be, this spotless, law enforcement upholding, character. But yet, years later, after a lot of stuff, he finally sold his house that he had lived in for a long time. New owners, and this is just a side note, new owners come in, buy the house, and as a house is there, you want to renovate it, you want to make it your own. So they are down in stairs and they find a false wall. And behind this false wall, when they remove it, guess what they find? I'm not kidding you. They find a meth lab. I mean, there's just no, I don't know, there's no words for this. So, of course, they call the police, and they're like, hey, I know this was Garrett's house, but look what we just found. I mean, this meth lab's obviously been in operation. And the police tell them to take everything out and throw it away. Yeah. Well, at least we know law enforcement's going on, by the tradition. Let's keep all things traditional. Ugh. You can't even make this crap up. And we're kind of ending this case because, like I said, it is unsolved, and we'll get into similarities probably in the next video to Delphi and some questions. But years later, there was a television show called Obstruction of Justice that stated, I mean, they just outright said it. Kirk Lane and Jay Campbell, they unalived, Kevin Ives and Don Henry. No question. So, of course, when this aired, these two officers were outraged. Well, I never. So they sued Obstruction of Justice for slandering them, and they lost. They lost because the evidence was clear. It was not slander. So you would think that these officers are behind bars, wouldn't you? Well, let's take a look at Kirk Lane. I mean, it just goes from bad to worse. Kirk Lane was never charged with anything. In fact, he kept getting promoted. He kept, rising up on in the state until from the years of, I believe it was 2017 to 2022. His official title was, he was the Arkansas Drug Director. I bet you were. In 2022, he decided to leave that position. And he is now the head of a drug recovery program. So I'm saying this. Maybe you finally got your life together, or maybe it's a better cover. I don't know. Now, Jay Campbell has a little bit of a different story. Jay Campbell is actually in prison. As far as I know, he's still there. But what did he go to prison for? And this was years later, of course. After, everybody else, all the witnesses were gone. He goes to prison because he's busted for, trafficking bodies. Yeah, I don't want to get a strike here. Human trafficking, kind of? Yeah, pretty much. So you're going to get busted for human trafficking, and, I doubt that there's not a part of that was drug related. I'm sure it was. But yeah, interesting, outstanding citizens. Yay! Kirk Lane, Jay Campbell, Dan Harmon. You're amazing! One more thing, I know this is getting long. In the years that followed this whole hoopla, and Linda Ives tirelessly worked on trying to get justice for these boys, Curtis Henry was, Don Henry's dad. Curtis, all of a sudden, flip-flops. And where he was, all trying to, support Linda, this was their family, Curtis did some really weird things. Now, remember I said he had two daughters who were very much into the drug scene? I mean, heavy drug use. And his one daughter, Gayla, seemed to have some knowledge about what happened on the tracks. He sent her to Florida. Sent his daughter to Florida and refused to let the FBI interview her. Okay? Curtis, against law enforcement, everybody starts disappearing, having weird accidents. He sends his daughter to Florida for years and years. She might still be there. I don't know. But then he changes his mind years after. He starts kind of demonizing Linda for the things that she's doing. And he's saying, oh no, law enforcement is doing a great job. I can't thank you enough, players that end up in jail later, for doing, the wonderful things that you're doing to find justice. Now, also in this time, you can see the parallels to Delphi. Let me just say this. Curtis came into a lot of money. Curtis didn't have a big fancy job. Curtis was able to buy a brand new house and you know, some luxury items. And then Curtis was able to start a new business for himself in like the big machinery, like the farm machinery. That stuff ain't cheap. But, you know, Curtis came into a wad of cash and nobody could seem to tell where it was from. I don't know. Maybe he won the lottery. Maybe he had a good investment. Maybe he really knew how to play those stocks. Good for you, Curtis. I say that, but here's the thing. I can't say that I 100% fault Curtis Henry for that, because if I had already lost one child and I knew that one or two more had the same potential as the witnesses to go that same way, and you know, all I was asked to do is get my daughter out of the state and not say a word, you know what? It would be hard. I'm just going to say this. I'm not saying that's what I would do, but it would be hard not to, because you've already lost your son. You don't want to lose anymore. So, you know, people make decisions based on, you know, I guess what they can handle. He wasn't going to bring Don back no matter what. I mean, so let's protect the ones that we've got. I kind of understand that. I'm not saying, I don't know his motivation. I'm just saying that's what it looks like. Linda Ives never gave up. She never stopped talking, and she never stopped annoying law enforcement. Good for you, Linda. This case has been opened and closed 9 times. 9 times. Unfortunately, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, somewhere around there, Linda Ives finally did pass away. But before she did, she thought, I'm going to ask for all of the pages, you know, the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA, that is supposed to give us, the people, the information that we need about these government agencies and stuff that we pay, and we want the documents to see what you've been doing. When she requested that documentation, I believe it was from the FBI, they turned around and they said, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have any paperwork. We got nothing. That's strange. Y'all been working on this case for all these years and you've got nothing? Where are my tax dollars going? Jeez. So when she kept on and on and on, and she's like, I know, and she kept asking different people and she wouldn't shut up about it, finally they gave her 2,000 pages, roughly 2,000 pages. However, what they have is roughly 16,600 pages. Of the 2,000 pages that she got, they are so redacted, it's just like black lines everywhere. It's like, you know, blank was at blank blank at blank blank. Well, you know what? You can't hardly understand it. It's ridiculous. Now, there is a petition, and I will leave a link below. I'm going to leave a link to a lot of things from Carnage on Ice, because if you really, really want to know about this story and all of the blatant mishandling and corruption. It's just blatant corruption is what it is. If you want to see all that, go and look at those videos. He did an excellent job. But there is one particular video that I want to leave in a link to, and that is a petition. They are trying to get people to sign the petition, even though Linda Ives is not around anymore, for the government to release those 16,000 pages unredacted, so we know who the criminals are, because it's clear that the FBI knew. Wow. Are there similarities here? I'm just saying. All right, I'm going to end this video for today. I know it's way longer than I meant for it to be, but this is the short version of the story, minus my comments. So we will talk about in part 2. We're going to revisit this in just a minute way and talk about things like tentacles. Is Arkansas that different from Indiana? Let's find out. I'll see you next time. Stay silky.